Well, first of all, can I introduce you to Otti Dubio? He's the project and the delivery lead for this project for Okra Solar. They're based in Australia, but Oti works in Cambodia. They're an award-winning SME that provide end-to-end services which are tailored to the needs of energy companies and utility providers. And this includes Internet of Things, smart grids, network planning and project development. So they've got a big vision to enable approximately 1.1 billion people throughout the world who don't have reliable access to power to live a safe and productive lifestyle. That's through clean, affordable and reliable access to electricity. And Okra have just been awarded funding through the Layer 2, which is the Low Energy Inclusive Appliance Pool that we run with the Energy Saving Trust. And they're looking at providing rice cookers to off-grid communities in Cambodia. So welcome to you, Oti, and I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Hi, everyone. My name is Oti Dubio, as Jane said. I am the project delivery lead for this project. And in general, my role within Okra is to ensure that we're delivering successful and sustainable projects. So I'll get right onto it. As I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, there are 900 million people who don't have access to energy. And that's because it's prohibitively expensive to deliver that access to that last mile. And what this causes is that these people will get dependent on traditional cooking methods and solid fuels, which is killing about 4 million people every year due to illnesses caused by household air pollution, just basically indoor smoke. And aside from these illnesses that are killing more people than malaria and AIDS combined, we have the economical effects on these households as well, where they end up spending $10 to $25 per month for basic energy access and for cooking fuels. Next slide, please. In Cambodia specifically, where I'm based right now, we have around 67% of these households using biomass cook stoves, so dependent on solid fuels. And if you actually look in just rural Cambodia alone, that number can go up to 80 to 85%. And this causes about 11,900 deaths every year in Cambodia alone, primarily affecting women, children, and older people who are involved, usually traditionally involved in the cooking process. And the impact here can also be seen in terms of the amount of time that those three groups have to spend in the cooking process, usually between 7 to 20 hours a week collecting wood for cooking. And also on top of that, another 1.5 hours every day cooking. There's a lot of time to be spending due to using traditional methods. Next slide. So Okra is designed for these type of communities. If you look at the slide, the background shows a village which we're actually working in with regards to this project, Stung Treo. It has 141 households. It's a little island on the Tonle Sap, which is the freshwater lake in Cambodia. And usually this type of village would not get access to the grid, and maybe never, simply because it's so hard to reach. And this is the type of setting in which Okra actually is able to deliver. Next slide. And how? Next. So the way we deliver is with our Okra pod technology, which we place in every single house. It has three main functionalities. The first one is that of a charge controller, regulating how much power is consumed. Then the second functionality of our product is the IoT nature, where we're able to remotely monitor consumption, energy consumption. And the third main functionality of our product is that each of these pods can connect to each other, allowing one house to borrow power from another when that's necessary, and in total allowing everyone to consume much more power than is expected from a typical solar home system. Next slide. So briefly, our platform consists exactly of this pod, which is shown in the slide. and that's placed in every single house. And of course, the software, which allows us to, as I've said, monitor remotely and track also payments of people that as they come in. So next slide. Now, with regards to this project, what we're trying to understand, the way we approach this, to try and understand four main things. The first part is we're trying to understand how compatible Okra is with these modern electric cooking appliances. Basically, a typical cooking uses a lot of power, and typical solar home systems are not able to deliver that power to allow people to be able to cook off grid in these remote locations I'm talking about. So Okra is essentially a high-powered solar home system, essentially, that allows you to connect to other ones, which means we would like to figure out, okay, because we're able to deliver 1.2 kilowatts hours, 1.2 kilowatt of power, are we able to actually provide access to these cooking electrical appliances within a network, or is the network going to die? The second thing we're trying to understand is the impact of actually getting these cooking appliances to the communities. They're going to be financial impact, the social impact. What can we actually observe? Now, due to our software platform, we're also going to be able to observe use behavior over time. So we're going to be tracking that and see, okay, is there any change from when they initially get the appliance versus much later in the process, 1 month, 2 months down the line? Do they use it more, less? What's the change over time? And then the last thing we're hoping to capture is sustainability of this type of project. Next slide. So we've taken a very experimental approach to this project. We're hopefully trying to set up a case study that can be replicated in other places. Or in the worst case scenario, we're hoping that we can collect a lot of data and a lot of lessons learned to provide to you all to inform future projects. The first thing we're doing is basically we've selected an Okra network site that is currently subsidized by the government, where people only pay 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And the thinking there is, okay, if they're paying so little for electricity, it's essentially normal grid prices, right, in Cambodia. If they're paying so little, then maybe they'll be much more eager to adopt these appliances. So that's what we're testing. We're going in there, we're selling these appliances at 25% margin, seeing if people are going to buy them, and then trying to observe adoption over time. Then, next slide. So the idea with the first location is that basically in the worst case scenario, people do not adopt it in this context. So if we know that people are not adopting these electrical cooking appliances in a subsidized area, then they're not going to adopt it when this area is not subsidized. But if they do adopt in our first location, then we have a follow-up testing, which is then in a privately owned Okra network where they're charging 80 cents per kilowatt hour. And will people then actually adopt in this one, which is actually much more easier to replicate because it's privately owned, right? And people can actually make money out of this network. In this network, what we're doing there is we're providing the appliances for free for 2 months, and also upgrading the system to allow them to be able to use these appliances for free as well. And after 2 months, we're then going to go back to a baseline survey, and after 2 months, the plan is to go back and then do a follow-up survey and essentially ask them if they're willing to continue with the network as it is. Of course, paying much more money than they are right now, but maybe because they see advantages in using our network, using the cooking appliances, they will continue to do that, and that's what we're hoping to see. And we believe, of course, if that happens, the potential for this to be replicated or scaled up is huge, and that's what makes us very excited, right? Next slide. So all of this is only possible because we have our Harvest software platform. I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an insight to it. At the top of the page, you can see a lab experiment we performed with a rice cooker. The purple line shows the productive load in this context, the power consumption of the rice cooker, and the blue line actually shows the battery, the power that's being used from the battery, essentially. If the top one is in vitro, the bottom if you look at the bottom of that slide, you see two charts, which are actually real time and the field. So that's the first house we actually installed in Stuntrell, the village chief's house. He had a rice cooker, and you can see that around lunchtime, he was cooking for about 20 minutes with the rice cooker. Then he leaves it on, and then the rice cooker switches back on, because it's one of those ones that if you leave them connected, they'll warm up themselves. So that's probably something we should have included in our training, and we will have to go back and train him up in that. But the point here is basically, yeah, we're able to see entirely the way they use these appliances over time, and we can track that for all the appliances that we have given out. So we're going to be able to collect an immense amount of data over that 2-month period in which we're monitoring. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the project to give you a bit of an overview of where we're at right now. As everyone else has been affected by Corona, so have we. The main impact has just basically been to engage the community. Where you would usually have groups, we've had to do things one-on-one, and people have been a bit hesitant. And of course, there's been the rising water levels in Cambodia, which has made logistics and procurement for the installation a bit tougher. And also, as you can see at the bottom there are initial sign-ups for people to be involved in this project. And the one site where it's cheap, it's been super good. Everyone's been like, yeah, I'm in, I want to join. And the other side where it's expensive, people have actually been hesitant, even though we're offering them a trial for free, mainly for reasons like they're worried about electrocution, or they say stuff like, we have so much wood, we don't want to pay for anything else, even if you're going to give us an initial trial. So that's not been super great, but we're going to observe a bit longer and see what can be done. Next slide. Sorry, that was just to show you guys the change in water level over the last month. I actually meant to skip that slide, but next. And on the positive side, as of right now, we've installed over 45 households connected to the solar home system, which means they're getting 24/7 reliable electricity with our Okra network. We have 5 of them as of right now using the cooking appliances we've provided them, and we're collecting that data already, and are excited to have distributed all 70 to 90 appliances by 15th of January, and we'll be able to then provide you guys access to all that data once the project is done. I think this is my last slide. Come on. Yeah, this is it. So that was me. That's all supposed to be skipped, but that was me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oti. That's a really good overview of the project, and it's kind of really interesting to see that the uptake that you've had, because I know you only started September time, so great to see that things are still progressing, even though we've all experienced slight issues. Okay, so I just want to mention that if you have any questions, please post them in the chat room, and we'll look at them after we've been through our second speaker. So I'd like to introduce you to Tarek Ketelsen. Tarek is the General Director of AMPERES, which stands for the Australia Mekong Partnership for Environmental Resources and Energy Systems Limited. So AMPERES is an independent research and engineering enterprise that works to introduce innovation and sustainability into the Greater Mekong region. So they partnered with Switch Batteries for a project that was supported through TRID, entitled E-Waste to E-Cook in Myanmar. So there's a great deal more to that, but I'm going to leave that to Tarek for him to explain. Thanks, Tarek. Tarek, your microphone is muted.
Sorry, yeah, it's working now, I guess.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jane, and thanks very much to the Loughborough University team. It's a real pleasure to be able to join this event. I've always wanted to learn more about Okra, so it's also great to be able to join with the session and hear from Ote as well. Okra are really doing some great stuff, and they've been also an inspiration for some of the things that we're doing. So it's great to connect with them, and also thanks to the MECS team, because I think for us, we were able to take an interesting idea and prove that it actually works. And that was primarily to do with the grant financing from MECS. So that's been really appreciated by us and by Switch and by our team. So yeah, so I'm talking about a project, E-Waste to E-Cook. It's a pilot project. It's about producing a modular recycled lithium-ion power pack for use in e-cooking in remote areas of Myanmar. So if we go to, in this presentation, I'll talk about 3 sections: the problem that we tried to address, the pilot that we did, and what we've got planned next. So if we go to the next slide, please, Johnny. So the problem, I think, is one that's well understood by most of the people here, and one you would have been aware of. This is a picture of the greater Mekong region by night with the nightlight data showing basically where electricity is being consumed. So the white patch on the bottom right of the slide is Ho Chi Minh City. That's where we're based, and the big patch in the middle, that's Bangkok. So if you went over to the left a bit more, we'd also see a big patch around Yangon, and then you see these big black spaces. And the problem really is one about reliable access to reliable electricity. So it's electricity access, but it's also the reliability of the access. If we go to the next slide, please. And you would have seen figures similar to these kinds of things before. So about 600 million people in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and it's an area that's experiencing lots of investment in grid expansion and growth of the electricity sector. But as Otte mentioned, not everyone's benefiting from that. So we have about 150 million people who are either off-grid or who are on the grid but suffering from blackouts and issues associated with weak grid conditions. And that's because on those grid areas, the demand for the electricity is growing so much faster than the grid services can keep up. These are, they're not tailored to kind of roll out at the speeds that they have been. So even countries like Vietnam, where we're based, 98% electric, kind of connected to the grid, 98% of the population. You're starting to see now, next year we'll enter a period of pretty systemic blackouts in Vietnam because the new generation technology just hasn't been able to be deployed quick enough. So 50 million people off-grid, 100+ million people in weak grid conditions looking for reliable electricity in Southeast Asia. And like, if you go to the next slide, please, Joni. Like many companies in Southeast Asia, we approached this problem in a pretty conventional way. We said, okay, let's build up a work stream to develop village scale mini grids in Myanmar, and we'll look at kind of off-grid electrification with PV storage technology in Myanmar. And you would all know this graph on the right here, which shows that kind of blue sweet spot for mini grids in terms of the size of the community, density, remoteness, and so on. And that further to the right, the sweet spot for solar home systems. So we looked at that kind of blue area and said, okay, let's also get involved in doing mini grids for villages in Myanmar. But what we found as we progressed is that there's these 3 key issues that make it really difficult for mini grids to operate. One is the viability, one is the affordability, and one is the reliability. So we found that as you understand this problem more and more, it's very difficult to bring affordable technology to remote rural communities in Myanmar using conventional off-the-shelf technology. And batteries were about typically around 60% of the price. So we were interested in exploring ways of reducing the cost of batteries, and that's how we got into this this space. And if we go to the next slide, Joni, I can explain how it connects to the cooking. So the pilot we worked on was this upcycling lithium-ion power packs. And I think it's important that we should just state here that we were not a company that had a cool technology that we developed and we said, okay, we've got this great technology, where can we apply it? And we went looking for a market for it. We came from this process of appreciating a problem and then trying to find a solution. And so as you understand how people use electricity or use energy in villages, the kitchen is sort of central to the home in Myanmar, and cooking is central to, is sort of an essential thing that everyone's doing every day. And most of these communities are still relying on fuel wood because even if they've got, you know, a battery, they might use it for lighting, but they might not use it for cooking. So if we can make a product affordable, then cooking is an area where it could have a dramatic uptake, and it was an area that it could have also dramatic benefits, as Otte was mentioning, from the health point of view. If we go to the next slide. So as non-cooking experts, we approached this problem from a bit of an abstract point of view, and we said, hey, well, what are these things? What are these entry points for us that we have to solve to be able to find a solution to it? One was a technological one, which was how can we make the batteries affordable, bring down the cost of the technology, and reliable and safe enough to use in kind of very remote off-grid locations. And the other one was a business model problem, is that we didn't want this to be a way to kind of make money off some of the, you know, to be honest, the poorest people in Myanmar, and some of the, people who need the electricity, who could value it the most. We wanted to find a way that we could center as much of the value stack of access to electric energy in the village itself. So that was about innovation in the business model. And we only were able to solve those two when we started to understand also the waste problem. So we were, having worked quite a bit in Myanmar, we were aware of a sort of a waste dump in Myanmar between Mandalay and the Chinese border, which included a lot of unofficial e-waste coming across the border. And you could kind of see the effects of this e-waste. And you can kind of see also the very efficient, like kind of local unofficial, what would you call it, markets that go around tinkering and recycling stuff inside the markets of Myanmar that are already established and in place. So by looking and understanding that the end of the cycle problem, the e-waste problem, helped us to also look at ways to make the technology affordable and to rethink the business models. If we go to the next slide. So this is how we framed the problem. I won't go into detail here, but the yellow stuff is all of the kind of the specific dimensions and aspects of the problem, like how much energy does a household need to cook with e-waste, what's the kind of the gender aspect, the cultural aspects to cooking, the issues of voltage fluctuations that communities or that people were reporting from those who were connected to, say, the grid and using electricity but didn't use it for cooking purposes. So there's a whole bunch of problems there. We kind of use those to frame a set of design criteria for our solution. So it gave us an idea about how big the system should be. We needed to be compatible with existing off-the-shelf technologies, like cooking technologies, like, you know, rice cookers and pressure cookers. So that meant also working in an AC environment for us. It meant trying to put the power pack as close to the source of use as possible. A whole bunch of these, the use of a battery management system to make it safe and so on. So we had all these design criteria. And then what we ended up with was this solution of a modular lithium-ion power pack for e-cooking that works across value chain of renewables to convert e-waste into locally manufactured, reliable e-cook units. So it's reliable, it's good for cooking, it's improved air quality in the home, it's new employment and revenue streams for villagers, and it's also reduced landfill. So we go to the next slide. This is just showing, I guess, the source of our materials was predominantly laptops, but there are also some EVs, and EVs in Myanmar context are mostly bicycles, or bikes, not cars, and then some consumer electronics as well. We sorted the e-waste into the usable and the dead cells, and the usable cells formed that pink upcycling loop in the middle where we assembled them into power packs and deployed them into off-grid electrical appliances. The dead cells, there's also a recycling loop here, which we didn't tackle, but there are people in California and in Germany who are tackling kind of recycling side of things, actually taking the dead cells, breaking them back down at their chemical elements, then creating new lithium-ion cells and you know, starting that process again. So in the future, there's a potential to link to that, but at the moment, we didn't connect to that side. The next slide, please. So our partners in the project, there was us, AMPERES, there was Switch Batteries, which is another Australian company that has been building kind of first high-performance batteries for racing EVs, and then more recently, like home storage systems in Australia as well. There's a Renewable Energy Association of Myanmar, and there's a local company, Yimon Electronics. I think Yimon is still involved in MECS, which is really great to hear, and the following on phases. And you can see some of the team there. So Utan Tay, he's a very important figure for us in our project, and he was really instrumental for it to work. He's sort of crouching on the first row, second from the left. And Mike, the guy wearing the beige khakis, second from the right, crouching on the front row, is the guy from Switch Electronics, who was sort of leading all the technology side of what we were doing. Okay, next slide. So our pilot village was Panyo, which is a small village in the central dry zone of Myanmar. It's in Nat Mok Township, which is famous for being I think the birthplace of General Aung San, who is the founder of modern democratic Burma or Myanmar. It's got about 1,200 people, 270 households. This is a relatively poor community. The average household income is less than $2 a day. People are mostly farming, but also animal husbandry is quite popular for people who can't afford the land for farming. It's not connected to the grid, so it's an off-grid community. And the interesting thing actually about this community and why we chose it was that if you look at the graph or the map on the left, you can see an orange shades covering the districts of Myanmar. So the darker the orange means the greater percentage of households that use batteries in a household light as a household lighting source. So this was a community where we were looking at around 40–50% of the community already using batteries for lighting. So there's a familiarity, at least familiarity with the kinds of technology, although they're mostly lead acid, but at least there's some familiarity there. And many households had sort of a very small 10-watt peak solar system. A couple of the richer households had 100, 200-watt peak systems, and two even had a diesel generator. I won't go into it, but the colors on the right, the square, that relates to the kinds of small, medium enterprises that there were around in the village. So these were for us potential productive uses of the cycle battery technology. The next slide, please. So the process we went through is relatively, this describes it here. So first you can see in the picture number 1 is showing the battery cells taken out of the laptop, so that's still in the casing. Then in picture number 2, we use a highly sophisticated technique similar to how you might crack open a coconut, where you crack the cells on the floor and then and extracted the 18650 cells from the casing. They then went through a process of being kind of checked for voltages first. So that was the first sort of safety check, and then we checked their capacity. During the capacity check, you also had to learn how to monitor the kind of the thermal performance of the batteries as they're being charged and discharged and so on. And then they were sort of sorted in step number 5 into cells with similar capacity, and then kind of bundled into these bricks, which were connected to a BMS and sort of electronics, and then they were packed in these I don't know what you call them. They're sort of suitcases that electricians would use. So it's a sort of a waterproof case. You can see that in picture 6 and 7. It's the black case in the middle of on the floor there in front of the guy with the phone. And then the kind of the white things are kind of shrink wrapped bricks of batteries. So you can see there's a dozen or 14 of those into one of those power packs. And one of those things is about 15 kilos, and it's about 2.5 kilowatt hours of power capacity. Okay, so next slide. This is just a quote from a couple of the women in the village who have been using it. So we installed during the project six of these power packs. And what was really surprising for us is that after the project finished in early 2020, before COVID really took off in February, and after the project finished, so there was no more grant financing, there's been probably twice as many power packs installed that sort of organically evolved. That we weren't providing funding for that, but the local partners and the local community were just keen to keep it going, and they've themselves have organised funding to get the necessary equipment to install more in the village. So for us, that's a real sign of that it's got value and success, because it's continuing, and even after the grant financing is finished. So for us, if you go to the next slide, is about how do we take this kind of the successes we had. It wasn't all success, but the successes that we had and the enthusiasm that you can see it in the community for local assembly, and turn that into kind of a business model for an entity. So while Jane kindly introduced me as AMPERES at the beginning, that is true, that's where I'm from, but we are looking to kind of spin off together with Switch and AMPERES, sort of co-owning it, but spinning off a local entity in Myanmar that would be like a Yangon battery company or something like that, that'll start producing these. And the model we're going to use for that is called, we've sort of described it as a community battery franchise cooperative. I'll try and explain what that means if you go to the next slide. So what we realized is there's a bunch of stuff related to this business model that has to be kind of centralized, and is best done centralized, and that's relating to IP, technology, training, secure supply chains, and access to financing. And then there's another bunch of stuff that is actually best delivered as close to the community, to the user community as possible. And so the franchise cooperative seeks to divide and distinguish between those two areas. So you can see on the map there's a yellow dot and a couple of blue dots. The yellow dot is the centralized stuff. That's what AMPERES and Switch will provide. And that is, as I said, the IP, technology, training, and so on. We helped to set up a microfactory in Yangon. The IP, the training, the technology, and everything comes through the form of sort of a containerized assembly microfactory, let's say, something that can fit inside a shipping container with all the equipment needed to assemble the power packs. We help that get established inside Myanmar, and then the community then provides, they're part owners in that system, and they provide, they get employment through it, and they provide labor to produce the batteries, which then go back to the community as well. The other part that we're just still trying to nut out here is this kind of digital communication side of things. So, if we're successful, we'll have these kind of microfactories all throughout Southeast Asia, and then being able to link, because it's a learning process, for us to be able to connect with the each of these microfactories is important from a training point of view and a troubleshooting point of view, but also for microfactories to connect with each other and share their experiences and learning is going to be another aspect that we haven't solved yet, but we're interested in working on that. Next slide, please. So from the technology side, the value proposition really comes from using this e-waste material. It makes it affordable. So even when we were buying the e-waste cells, it was 30 to 50% cheaper than the new lithium-ion cells that people were using in mini grids. It's portable, which is has some benefits for to fit in with the behavior of villages. For example, some villages have solar irrigation systems, so they can take the power pack out to the farm and charge it, and then bring it home charged. So it's more reliable and it's dispatchable. And next slide. On the business model side, the value proposition is also, there's three bits of it. One is the ownership. So we're really excited that these microfactories will be located in villages who will be owners, part owners of the system with us. So we share the value proposition for success. There's employment benefits for the community as well. And we in Panyo village, we worked with, nobody had finished, nobody had gone to university. Some hadn't finished high school. And they were, successfully able to work on the assembly of these power packs in the first round. And then there's the environmental benefits from the e-waste stream, and then of course the health benefits as well. I think the next slide should be close to the last. Yeah, so the 150 million people, we can see kind of 5 or half a dozen main entry points. One is direct to the households in terms of as a market. One is direct to the households themselves, similar to what we've done at Panyo, but scaling it up. One is working with the solar home system integrators and mini grid operators and developers who we were trying to be in the past. And who he may still be in the future, and working with them so that they use our products in their systems. There's been a lot of interest from the fishery side of things, so marine fisheries in southern Myanmar and in central coast of Vietnam, and aquaculture in the Mekong Delta, where they need a portable power source that can go on boats or can go on floating fish farms. And then for urban users in places like Yangon, when they have power cuts, to have a backup system in place, and that kind of use as well. So I think that's the last slide. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Tarek. That's a really interesting overview of the project. I mean, it's one of the ones that we found interesting. And over the past 2 days on these innovation sessions, batteries has been the one topic of conversation we've kind of come back to again and again. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the developments that you've had as part of your project, and the fact that it's kind of continuing after the funding's ended. So I'm just going to go back to, we've got a couple of questions that are in the chat room. I'm going to go back to the start. The first one's asking, Ote, this is kind of aimed at you, whether you can explain about what the component sizes are for the solar home systems that you're using. So the PV panel size, the battery, and what type of battery you're using, inverter, etc. If you could just give us a bit more information, that would be great.
Yes, fine, sure. So the way we set up our networks is we usually have packages, and so depending on the package you want, the panel and battery is going to vary. I think our largest battery size is we have two 330 watt solar panels on for the largest package, which is one of the ones that allows you to actually use the cooking equipment. And we have a 24 volt, 150 lithium ion, 24 volt, 150 amp hour battery as well. That's a combination of our larger package sizes. And then I think we have a third package, second package, which also allows them to use around 700 watt hours per day. So the first package I just described allows around 1,800 watt hours per day, which we assume is going to be at least 2 to 3 times cooking, and then otherwise normal use that you find in Cambodia. And the second one as well, one panel of around 300 watts and same battery. So that the smaller ones have 12 volts, 75 amp hour batteries and smaller panels. So that's they are combined with the Okra controller in every house. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's great. So are you using lithium ion batteries throughout? You're not using lead acid at all?
Well, for this, so for different projects, we actually have, so we can use both lead acid and lithium, but for this specific project, we are using lithium ion batteries, yes. Okay,
great. So the next question relates to the tariffs. And you mentioned flat rates throughout the day and night. Is that right?
So actually, no, that's not correct. So in this context, actually, it's not really a flat rate. In some of our projects in the Philippines, we do have daily flat rates, but for this project, it's actually you're paying per kilowatt hour used. We have capacities for the day, so the maximum they can actually use is set, but if they don't use all of it, for example, they don't pay for all of it, right? So they pay for whatever they end up using.
Okay. Right. So this is a question for you, Tarek. And it's a question from Simon, who recalls that from your final report, you had challenges finding enough, or you expressed concern that you'd be able to find enough second-hand cells within Myanmar. And I recall that you mentioned more policy intervention to enable that waste stream to be accessed. So can you just explain how, since the project is completed, how you've managed to manage that, and whether you are managing to source reusable second-hand batteries?
Yeah, that was something we did put in the report. Thanks a lot, Simon, for that question. I think it's not a question of perhaps so much that is there enough e-waste in Myanmar, but it's about how to access it and get it efficiently into an assembly process. So that was one of the one of the things that we've realized, and that's why we sort of talked about splitting the initiative into kind of stuff that needs to be centralized and stuff that needs to be done at a local level. I think the supply chain security stuff is stuff that needs to be done at a more like centralized level, allowing us to say, look across Myanmar and set up relationships with some of these. I mean, there's now 2 recycling companies in Myanmar that are collecting office waste from different groups. There's so we would set up something with those kinds of groups to access and to collect the cells and then send them to these microfactories, which are maybe located in a sort of a smaller village level. So we've thought through how to do it, but actually in terms of delivery of new cells, or new like kind of power packs, we've been quite badly affected by COVID because we haven't been able to travel to Myanmar. And so it's been hard to kind of get things forward, to establish an entity there and really put into practice all of these things. But I'm confident that the cells are there and that they continue to grow in number as Myanmar develops. But it's just we're going to have to do a bit more prototyping on how we're going to secure those supply chains.
Okay, thanks. And kind of a question from me, really. You noted that batteries account for 60% of the solar home system pricing. So how is your system addressing that? What's the kind of cost of your system, your batteries?
Well, in the project, because we were sort of short on time, we actually bought the cells that we used in those pilot units. And even with factoring the cost of buying the cells, obviously they're a lot cheaper than new ones, but even factoring that cost that we had to buy the cells rather than scavenge or salvage them, we're still, depending on the quality of your lithium-ion battery, we're still like 30 to 50% cheaper. So I think when we get the supply chain side of thing organized and set up, and when we get this process of salvaging all of these e-waste cells, it's going to be cheaper still than that compared to new cells.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it, really? Waiting for them to become available. Great, thank you. Ote, there's a question here for you, whether you are aware of any comparative study between what you're doing and a mini grid?
Yeah, I mean, you mean with regards to specifically using mini grid for cooking, or just mini grid in general for any technologies?
It says costs, use cases. So, Chris, maybe you can expand on your question, please.
Just a general idea, because your system seems like a solar home system with which you can connect together. So it sort of seems between a solar home system and a microgrid. So I'm just wondering about the costs, or is it fair to compare them, even because a mini grid might be a lot bigger than what you're doing in terms of customers, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right there. I think so. We envision it that when you're trying to provide electrification to a specific project, that you would essentially weigh up between Okra and a mini grid, because we think our system is cheaper, mainly because there's a reduction in transmission costs. You don't need the massive poles, the huge wires, and you're creating the energy is being generated at the source it's going to be used at. So we realize that large costs associated with mini grid projects is actually net transmission. And so that's why we think Okra is a much more cost-effective option, especially considering the amount of power we can generate, which is far beyond what standard solar home systems can provide.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ote. Tarek, this is a question for you, and there's kind of 2 questions combined here. So the first talks about the lifespan of the upcycled e-waste batteries and whether that's a concern. And related to that, it's whether how long you expect them to last, and expect the batteries you upcycle to last in the cooking units before they end up having to go into the recycling loop? And then just kind of going back to the construction phase, whether there's maintenance or training required to keep the batteries working for a long time. Sorry, there's a couple of questions there. It wasn't very eloquently put, so give me a shout if you need me to raise them again, and you need to just come off mute. Tarek, you're still on mute.
Sorry, I'll start again. Can you, turn it off. Sorry about that. I was on mute. They're really important questions, and the answer is we don't know yet how long what's the lifespan, how many cycles and so on these batteries can make, and it will be varied as well, because what we found was that the cells are all at different capacities, the recycled cells that we're using, and so we would kind of put them together in bricks with kind of equivalent or similar capacity, and then put those bricks together to try and get a minimum of 2.5 kilowatt hours in the unit. So there would be high variation between one unit and the next unit, and we don't yet know, because it's they've been operating for less than a year, or a year, let's say. Then we don't yet know how long they're going to fully last. So one thing that we're thinking about on the business model side is to maybe follow some of the solar home systems people down like a payment for service type model. So that way, if the units stops performing, it can be switched out, and so like a kind of more like a rental type model, so that if the unit stops performing, it can be switched out and replaced with a new one, at least until we can understand better. With more and more units deployed, we'll be able to understand better how long they can actually last. And then, how long do you expect the batteries? That was the lasting part. And the question about the types of appliances, it was rice cookers, and those in Myanmar they're called red pans, which I think is like an electric frying pan. They were the two main ones that we found that were being used. And I think in Yangon, when we tried a unit there, we were using pressure cookers as well, but I think it was mostly the rice cooker and the electric red pan unit. Did that answer all the questions, Johnny? There was a couple there, so I'm not sure if I got them all. Oh, sorry, not Johnny.
Yeah. I think you've covered them, kind of maintenance and the training. So any training required to keep them working?
Yeah, that I think there is. I think we've been lucky that our partners in Myanmar understand batteries quite well. So Utante understands the batteries really well. Mawin has learned really quickly, so I think that's really helped, because they are troubleshooting and supporting the village in that process. So yes, there is an ongoing training need, and I think that's part of the reason I think we need this kind of digital, recognizing that you can't always travel, or you can't always get on a plane these days. So having this digital way of like providing that troubleshooting, at least to the micro factory, and then as part of the kind of the distribution support is doing the same for the villages from there.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I guess so. For me, one of the questions is I've been looking at the reviewing of all of the TRIG projects and looking at some of the barriers really for the uptake of e-cooking, but energy storage in particular. And there's a kind of diverging body of thought about batteries. And I wondered if you could both talk about how the appetite for the off-grid market is either supported by battery storage. Whether you think that will be a kind of key element moving forward?
So, should I start?
Yeah, go first, Ate, please.
Yeah, I would say that, battery storage is super important, because you're unable to cook at nighttime, and essentially you need to be able to then cook at nighttime. You can't generate power, you can only generate power during the day, not nighttime. You need battery storage to cook at nighttime. Therefore, change in battery storage technology or reduction in price only going to hopefully increase uptake, increase use of e-cooking devices, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Ote said, that especially because it's a cooking practice. I think when we did the kind of the review and the baseline work in Myanmar, we found that there's a strong gender component to this as well. So in solar, when people had a solar home system and they were cooking, what they found was that it meant that like women in the family had to go home earlier to cook when the sun was available, and so that obviously affected like economic opportunities for the women in the family. So having a battery that allows you to cook when it suits your kind of your family's behavioral practices and your livelihood activities is really important, not only from a convenience point of view, but also from an opportunities point of view. So I think that's a critical aspect of it. At the same time, there's it also means you get more competition for the power than if it was just purely solar PV system, because you can use it when you want. So sometimes we found that there's a conflict between using the batteries for cooking purposes, or using them for karaoke, or using them to watch like the football match when Myanmar was playing one of its neighbors. Or so there was, there's it does mean that it is a highly valued source of electricity, and so it's one that I think you have to also be able to grow with needs as they grow. So when we built our first power pack, it was a 1 kilowatt-hour system, and we increased it to 2.5 kilowatt-hour, and actually took the inverter out of the unit and made it a separate thing because of that need to kind of avoid conflicting use for the power.
Great, thank you. Well, I don't think we have any more questions in our chat, so I'd just like to say thank you both for the insights into your projects today. If you get a chance to have a read through, then please do. Most people have really appreciated what you've kind of talked about this morning, and for me it's been really useful to get that insight into two areas of the world where we're not doing as much work. Most of our work is focused in Africa. So thank you for that. As I've mentioned, the recording for this will go on our website later, and you can access the AMPERES report under the publications section of the website for the TRIG project. So please do go and have a look there. And when Okra finish their work, then there'll be a similar report there. But in the meantime, thank you very much, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Joni. And thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.